Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this book discussion of Falling by T.J. Newman. My name is Jennifer Malik. I'm the editor of the Reading List, and we're hosting this event tonight along with Jonathan Ball Publishers. Falling is a nail-biting suspense thriller about a terrifying flight from LA to New York, where the pilot has been given an impossible choice, the plane or his family. The book is out now from Jonathan Ball Publishers in South Africa, and it's available at all good bookstores and bad bookstores, and online wherever you get your books. So if you haven't got a copy yet, you can do that while you're watching. Now that's the glory of online shopping. Or you can, if you've been vaccinated, or if you're feeling courageous, you can go to the bookshop in the morning and pick yourself up a copy. It's a gripping read, and it really will keep you entertained in these dark times. Gillian Flynn, the best-selling author of Gone Girl, said of the book, T.J. Newman has written the perfect thriller, which is high praise indeed. So whether or not it's the perfect thriller, I'm sure we'll find out this evening. To dissect Falling this evening, we've got BB Slippers in conversation with bookstagrammer Eugenie Griegen, who's Lies Bandig on Instagram. And they're joined by former flight attendant Janke Lotte, who you may know from CakeNet, Op My Eish. And they're going to tell us what they thought of the book, and whether or not it could happen in real life. We'll find out. Please leave your questions about the book or the discussion in the comments section wherever you're watching this video, on Facebook or on YouTube. If you have any questions about the book or about what it's like to be a flight attendant, and whether scary things like this really do happen, just leave those in the comments, and we'll have a Q&A at the end of the session if we have any questions. Without further ado, let me hand over to our participants this evening to take over the conversation. Enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Jennifer, and the Reading List. Thanks to Jonathan Ball, and welcome to Eugenie Griegen, who's a journalist and a bookstagrammer, and then Janke Lotte, who worked as a flight attendant and will be able to fill us in on the potential of this horrifying thing actually happening. So I don't know if any of you, Janke or Eugenie, have been following sort of the marketing around Falling and T.J. Newman kind of shooting to the top of, or almost the top of the New York Times bestseller list in an instant. I always like seeing this kind of thing. I always think of someone as kind of an overnight success, I guess. But then I went on this YouTube vortex watching videos and conversations with her. And this success definitely didn't come easy. So she started out in musical theater. She studied musical theater, moved to New York, pursued a career in musical theater, and basically just crashed and burned spectacularly. Like, this just did not give. It didn't turn out very well for her. So then she moved back to her hometown and became a bookseller, which is a dream job, actually, if you can make a living out of it. That sounds amazing. And then her mother, who also worked as a flight attendant, kind of encouraged her to apply for a job as a flight attendant, which she then turned out loving. And then she had the idea for writing this book on a plane. If you go on YouTube and go look at some of the interviews with her, she describes the story over and over again. So I won't spoil her fun in telling you the story, but how she came upon the idea. And yeah, then she started scribbling notes for the book in flight, and she started writing first drafts in flight. And eventually, when COVID hit, she took a voluntary leave of absence from work. Like, obviously, there wasn't a lot of work for flight attendants and pilots, and airlines were closing down. But then she really got to work writing the book, and eventually, after 41 rejections from literary agents, the number 42 signed her up and got her a 7-figure book deal for 2 novels, of which Falling is the first. And then in these videos, she speaks a lot about rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, obviously being a debut author and in the process of trying to find an agent for the book. She rewrote it something like 30 times, or there were 30 drafts of the book. And yeah, earlier today was reading again some interviews with George Saunders, who's an author I really admire. And he writes very beautifully and talks very beautifully about editing and rewriting as a token of love and respect for your reader, and also as a means of creating a connection with another person, a person unknown to you and a person who's actually on the other side of time. And so he says the deeper parts of our brain are actually more emphatic. If you revise something 20 times, for a mysterious reason, it becomes more social, emphatic, and compassionate. Yeah, I just really love that. And I thought about that when I heard how many times she had rewritten this. And I was wondering if you, as a reader, either of you, felt this sort of connection with the book. Is the book speaking to you? Is it connecting with you as a stranger in another country, in a completely different set of circumstances? Is there something about the energy and persistence and effort that went into it that spoke to you, to either of you?
I think, if I have to be honest, for me, I read this book so fast, it flew by so quickly that I didn't pay so much attention to, the way it was written and the style in which it was written, which maybe can also be proof of rigorous editing, the fact that the story is kind of flying by, maybe that is essentially what she aimed for. For me, the effort that I did notice was the way she went about relaying some of the technical details of flying and doing it in such a way that it doesn't seem jargony. I think she made it very accessible to readers who are not familiar with aviation or the role of pilots or flight attendants. So I think she used that insider knowledge of her. I think she used that really well.
Janka, did you feel a connection to the story and to TJ Newman as the author of the story?
Definitely. For me, it can be a fantastic story, but if it's not well written, I will literally put down the book and not read further. But this book, I can't put it down. And I actually catch myself rereading parts, not because I don't understand, not because it doesn't make sense, but because I'm enjoying it so much. It's like, wait, it's like, when you're watching a movie and you rewind, you want to see it again. It's like I'm doing that. So yeah, I'm definitely feeling the connection, and it's really well written. Yeah.
So, in terms of the writing, as someone who's worked on flights, could you see yourself writing in flight the way she did? I don't think she was sitting there like really writing drafts of the book, but she was taking notes and writing little pieces of the story while working as a flight attendant, like literally in the air. Is that possible? Do you think could you imagine yourself doing something like that?
Yes, because especially when you do long-haul flights and passengers are sleeping, you literally have nothing to do. So for example, I sat and journaled during those times. So instead of journaling, I could definitely see myself writing a story, because so many times I was thinking, wow, there can be a sitcom about this flight, or, a movie, whatever. So yeah, definitely, I understand why she did it, 100%.
Okay. And this is, quite a tall tale and a very traumatic thing to have happened to the crew and the passengers. But in terms of your own flying days, what is the most interesting thing that ever happened to you in flight?
So I was fortunate enough to never have a terroristic, nothing like that. I was a flight attendant for 4 years. Nothing like that ever happened. I think the worst thing that has happened is medical situations. So like I've had a little boy, 6 years old, that had an epileptic episode. I think the worst thing that happened to me, but this is it's kind of personal. I was once accused of stealing a ring on board, one of the passengers in the business class. So that was horrible, because I literally knew that when we land, the police will be waiting for me. I will be searched, which is what happens. So I think that was the worst thing. But I mean, I've never been in a situation where we have such attacks. I've heard of my friends, though, that were in situations where, and you won't believe who gives the threats most of the time, it's the crew. Like I've heard about crew writing a note saying bomb on board, leaving it in the lavatory or on the mirror because they don't want to do the flight. Like, this is ridiculous. But I've never been in such a situation, so it's not that common.
I think just because we're on the topic of the crew now, so a theme in Falling, and something that she uses to actually develop the plot as well, is the sense of camaraderie among the crew. Like, they're a family and they work together, and yeah, they will do anything for one another, but also for the passengers on the flight. Yeah. Is this something you experienced as reality yourself as well? Is that how it is?
Yes, definitely. However, I noticed with a book, it's a bit different because they are crew that work together a lot of times. With us, it was completely different. You work with different crew every single day. But that is really a thing. Like, you can be two complete different people and have complete different interests, but we always have each other's backs with safety, you know. I think the same thing would have happened with us if such a thing would occur. It's always safety first. It's always our lives that matter the most. So, yeah, I think definitely that's real for sure. It's cabin crew lingo, if I can call it that.
Eugenie, do you want to share something about your reading experience? Like, how would you describe just the feeling reading this book? And if you had to play sort of algorithm and suggest the book to someone, like if you enjoyed this book, you'd also enjoy Falling by TJ Newman. Anything, that you would recommend?
I think in terms of my reading experience, it was a very brief and very intense. I mean, it's a riveting story. It's so fast-paced. I think I basically read it in one sitting. So I don't really read a lot of thrillers, to be honest. So I can't compare it to anything that I've read recently. But I can say that the story definitely played like a movie in my head. There's this one movie, Die Hard, I think the second one, that I had flashbacks of while I was reading this book. So I think definitely if you enjoy any type of action movie or suspense storylines, I think you'll definitely enjoy this.
So I can echo at least the experience of trying to read it in one sitting, but I was in the bath while I was reading it, and then my book fell into the bath. I don't know, something exciting was happening and I just kind of dropped it. But then I was so into the story, I couldn't stop. So I got out and I got a hairdryer and I was just sort of paging and blowing and paging and blowing as I went on, and then finished it the same night. So I had that same experience of literally, it's such cliche to say that you couldn't put the book down, but I really couldn't. I had to know how it ends. Are you, Janke, you're not quite done with the book yet. You're working your way through it, but are you having a pleasant reading experience so
I'm having
far?
a very, very pleasant reading experience. I just started like 2 days ago because I really wanted to know what the book. Actually, when I read about the plot, I was like, wow, okay, I really want to read this. But in between jobs, it's a bit difficult. But anyway, I'm really enjoying it, and it's really taking me back to my flight attendant days. I'm getting a bit nostalgic. So that just shows you how well it's written. It feels really real. It's taking me back. So yeah, I'm definitely enjoying it much more than I actually thought I would. So yeah.
Okay, and I don't know if you are a big reader or have read anything recently that you'd be able to compare it to? Is there anything that
I actually like fictional novels and I love romantic novels. And I know this is not a love story, but I still get the love story there. So I can't compare it to anything that I've read recently, but I'm enjoying that as well. It's not just the thriller, there's a love story as well. So yeah.
Nice. So in terms of kind of comparing it to something similar, a strange thing happened when I was on Instagram and kind of actually looking for TJ Newman's page. And the first post that came up was Jonathan Ball advertising a new release called Hostage by Claire McIntosh. And I wanted to see, okay, what's this about? And then when I read the description of the plot, I'm going to read it out to you. It says, Mina is trying to focus on her job as a flight attendant, not the problems of a 5-year-old daughter back home or the fissures in her marriage. But the plane has barely taken off when Mina receives a chilling note from an anonymous passenger, someone intent on ensuring the plane never reaches its destination, someone who needs Mina's assistance and knows exactly how to make her comply. And then when I read a little bit more about it, I realized it's sort of the same situation that is described in Falling. Like the crew member is our character and they are sort of being blackmailed while someone is holding their family on the ground hostage and threatening to murder the family if they don't cause problems on the plane or crash the plane. And this was so interesting for me, the fact that this same idea in 2 different books at roughly the same time. And I'm not suggesting anything fishy or anything like that, not plagiarism. I just find it fascinating that these ideas are out there and then sometimes the time is ripe for a certain type of idea. In Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert writes really eloquently about this, and also cites some examples from maths and science, and the same thing happening, kind of the same theories coming about in different parts of the world at the same time, and that it probably has a little bit to do with the zeitgeist. And if we had to kind of come up with a metaphor or pretend that this book is an allegory for something about the time we're living through now, what does it mean? What do you think is the allure of this idea of being trapped and kind of being responsible for a lot of people's lives and having to make, I think, really difficult decisions? If those are some of the themes and through lines from these plots, it just made me wonder, how does that relate to the moment we're living through now?
Yeah, it's interesting. On the one side, you'll think people would only want to read like light and heartwarming stuff, during times like these. But I think we mainly read, we want to escape. And so any story that sucks you in and grips your attention can do that. And then it's also a bonus if you can relate with some aspects of that story, like in this case, feeling trapped, feeling responsible for other people, having to make impossible choices. Also, I think what was funny for me, the situation in books, Falling or any book, it's going to have an ending. It's going to be resolved in some way, and maybe that's kind of people crave that. That's kind of a nice change from what we're experiencing at the moment, where we can't see an ending to anything.
Yeah, Janka, do you have any thoughts on sort of, is there a metaphorical interpretation, or does it mean something that we're obsessed with entrapment and moral quagmire, really tough decisions, there's no clear right or wrong. I think that's also the other thing about the decisions the pilot, especially in Falling, is forced to make. It's not a clear cut, there's a bad guy and there's a good guy, and I'm going to do the right thing. I don't know. Does it?
I said it better than Eugenie. Like she said, like, you know, there's going to be an ending. I think in today's time, we are very scared to make a decision and to take responsibility for the decision that we are making. Like you said, because it's black or white, maybe gray, but I mean, we don't want to make the wrong decision. We are afraid of it. So I think that is maybe the moral. That's maybe why we want to read about it, because at least it's not my decision. I don't have to make the decision. You can read how they came to the decision, why they made it, and what was the repercussions. And in reading that, maybe you learn something from it. Maybe you learn, or you can speculate, what would I have done in that situation? So it kind of makes you think a little bit as well, I think. So,
Janco, were you still flying when COVID first hit and the first lockdowns came, or were you already done being a flight attendant by then?
I was very lucky. People think I stopped because of COVID, but no, I stopped in December 2019. Basically, when I returned home, it started. So no, I was lucky enough. I'm very lucky that I made it out, because a lot of my friends got retrenched. They were so unhappy and depressed, because even if you do get to still fly, you can't go out on a layover. The rules are so strict. So yeah, I was lucky enough to make it out before.
And do you think, just having lived through our first sort of hard lockdown last year, are there similarities between long and stressful flights? I can't imagine that every flight is a pure joy and you love being on it for 20 hours or whatever. Is there something to be said for a long flight, and the entrapment and a lockdown experience, what we've all had a bit of a taste of over the past year and a bit?
Definitely. I think the biggest, the thing that they have in common is you're alone. You're very alone. Even though you're on a flight with 200 or 300 other people, you're completely alone. You don't know the crew. You don't know the customers. You don't know the captain. You don't know the first officer. So even though you are with people, you are alone. No one knows you. No one knows your soul. So I think that's definitely the biggest similarity. So yeah, it felt quite the same. It was quite depressing for me, to be honest, because I actually left flying because of that. Like, it's a very, very lonely job. People don't understand why, but yeah, it is. And then I was like, okay, so I came back, and now I'm lonely again. Damn it.
No. Eugenie, I was thinking earlier today, when our hard lockdown started and internationally there was a clampdown on flights, all kind of international air traffic was cut off to South Africa. And I remember seeing footage of airports at that time and being really struck in a way that almost nothing else I had seen visually in terms of what we were living through then really struck me. It's kind of like airports and flying, they do hold some kind of a magic, I don't know, there's some relationship to humanity. Like, we see beautiful scenes and heartbreaking scenes on airports, and the emptiness of those airports during the lockdown, it just really did something to me. So I guess I'm also wondering, yeah, it kind of makes sense to me that books about flying, being trapped on planes, being in difficult situations on planes would kind of pop up now, because I do think they are very poignant vehicles for communicating something about any sort of time we are living through. Not really a question.
Yeah, no, definitely. I remember being on an airplane shortly after the lockdown started for a story. and it was just surreal. So no, I definitely agree with you that there's something in there, and that a lot of writers probably saw the potential in these situation.
So we've all mentioned how crazily sort of propulsive the story is. It just moves. It's like there's jet fuel in the story and there's no stopping it. It's moving towards an end. And I was wondering if either of you have thought about what is it that makes a story this compelling and propulsive and impossible to put down?
I think in this case, maybe definitely the fact that there's like a ticking clock, there's a deadline. So the flight is X hours long, and they need to find a solution to what seems to be an impossible problem. Also, the stakes are high. I think we can probably say, without giving too much away, that crashing the plane and or losing his family, they are not the only problems that Bill has to deal with. I mean, there's a lot of other things that he has to navigate as well.
Yeah, literally.
And then also, for me, the cliffhangers at the end of every chapter, which I also think is amplified by the multiple points of view.
Yes.
So you're busy with Bill's story. It ends on a cliffhanger. You need to know what's going to happen now. But now you first have to follow Jo and her story, which also ends on a cliffhanger, and so on and so on. So that definitely creates a lot of tension. Something else, probably the fact that I think every scene kind of reveals something different. And as a reader, I mean, people are problem solvers. So you're also trying to figure this out in your head, and you're trying to find a solution. And each chapter, you're kind of getting new information, and you have to adapt that to whatever solution you think is going to solve this problem. I think for me, that was the main ingredients that kind of pushed me along in the story.
Do you have anything to add to that, Janka?
Well, all of that, and then of course for me, I'm putting myself in their shoes because I was a flight attendant. So I'm thinking, okay, would I have done that? What would I have done? So for me, that's also, gripping.
I must say, I thought the same thing, but not thinking as a flight attendant, but imagining being a passenger, and suddenly, you're kind of used to flying, and you know what the normal things are, and suddenly things are kind of happening on this flight that you're like, should I be worried about this? And the crew are smiling and reassuring and saying, do not worry, we're just manually lowering your oxygen mask, but please don't worry about anything.
It will make me question everything on my next flight,
Exactly. And I think, local flights here, we don't really get to use our phones and the internet, but this is something different on that flight, where that information is sort of coming out of the plane via social media, and also feedback trickling back in, like people posting questions and getting feedback from people on the ground saying, there's probably something going on up there. This isn't normal. So I found that really interesting. Eugenia, I also just wanted to agree with you in terms of the different characters telling the story, and the way she also later in the book uses that to expand the story into the wider world, where suddenly we're used to these characters, basically 3 or 4 different characters telling us the story, but then suddenly opening up into this baseball game. And again, I don't want to spoil what happens there, but I thought that was quite clever and an interesting new dimension to the story. It's a very brief escape from the plane, and and just bringing the situation into a more public setting, but then giving us sort of characters that we meet there for the first time. We meet them very briefly, but this is very much also possibly going to impact them and how they think about what is happening, and how that is different to how the people on the plane and on the ground are handling the situation. I found that very interesting. So was there anything else about the style and the writing, the story, that either of you wanted to comment on or kind of highlight that you specifically enjoyed or found strange, or
I did have some thoughts about the hijackers and their motive and kind of the attempt to humanize them and explain their reasoning. Also kind of an attempt to shed light on a political situation. I saw a lot of reviewers were very divided about this, and there was some question about stereotypes and stuff like that. But I think if I go any further into it, I might spoil, I don't want to tell people why this plane was hijacked or why this plane was chosen. But I mean, my Instagram DMs are open if anyone wants to discuss that.
But
I think there's definitely a conversation that can be held about that.
Yes, that is also something that caught my attention. And it is. I would probably side with the reviewers who weren't like extremely enthusiastic about that. But then on the other hand, as anyone who's tried to write anything knows, it's difficult. And thinking about how I would solve that as an author and try and do it differently, I don't really have an answer to that. So she does make an effort, but it does at times maybe feel a little bit politically correct and just trying to not say anything offensive, like covering all the bases. We're not going to offend anyone with this narrative of a really bad thing to do. But I could have excellent reasons for doing it. So I don't know. I also felt a bit, I wasn't entirely convinced about that. But again, I think we have to give a debut author a bit of grace to just write and not have it doesn't have to be perfect. And what she did get right was to get us to want to keep reading. In spite of that, in spite of your hang-ups or things like that just weren't entirely convincing, or style-wise here and there, I guess. My palette leans more towards the literary fiction side, so like style-wise here and there, I was also like, not my favorite style of writing or whatever. But again, I couldn't put the book down, not even when mine was like drenched. I had to keep going. So I do think I am so interested to see what she does next, because there's always, it must be horrible to follow up a huge success like this. They've already paid you a massive advance. There's no getting out of this. So it's going to be very interesting to see what she writes next. Okay, so on that point, and the book doing so super, super well, it was number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list this week. It's really fascinating to see this marketing machine at work, and her appearing on all the major sort of breakfast news shows. Any opportunity to kind of tell this story of a flight attendant who writes this thriller about a flight attendant and things going really wrong on a flight. It's a very sellable narrative, it's a book marketer's dream. Like this, you can go to someone with and go and like do a write-up or make an insert. But what it made me wonder was like where either of you stand on the kind of write what you know school of thought. When it comes to novels, like surely we don't expect TJ Newman to now only write flight attendant novels for the rest of her life. What do you think about writing what you know versus I'm imagining that the book we spoke of earlier, let me just get the author's name right, Claire McIntosh, is not necessarily a flight attendant, but she still wrote a flight attendant story. So
I don't think you can or should only write what you know. I definitely think it's a good starting point. I mean, this is a debut, and in this case, the writer's inner knowledge definitely contributed a lot to the story. And for most people, it's probably, easier to start with what you know. But no, I definitely don't think she should only stick to writing airplane stories. I think there's also a question about what falls under the things you know. Does that only include stuff that has happened to you? Because that would make your scope very limited. And I think if everyone just stuck to the write what you know rule, I think we would lose a lot of stories that comes from imagination or curiosity or observation or research. And then we kind of risk having stories that are very one-dimensional and, they only kind of matter to a small group of people.
I don't want to open a can of worms, but I think that also kind of it applies to the debates we're having about who is allowed to write what story a little bit when it intersects more with identity politics, and we're sort of limiting people in terms of what they are allowed to write based on what their identity is. But let's not really go into that. I don't think it has that much to do with falling. But okay, on a plot point, again, we're really going to try not to give too much away, but a lot of this plot rests on the fact that the crew's bags aren't checked. Janka, I found that frightening, especially in the light of what you told us earlier. I know they were only writing bomb threats and notes because they didn't want to do a specific flight, but that must be an unstable person willing to do that kind of thing. So I would want that person's bag to please be checked like mine. Does this happen? Can a crew member board a flight without having their bag checked?
That does not really happen. I mean, if going out station, like if you're at your main station, they are very strict. You still have to remove your belt, your jacket, everything. So they still body check you as well. It's not only your belongings. So I wouldn't say it's that easy. Some stations, yes, it depends where you're flying to and from. Some stations, they are a bit more lenient. But by that, I mean, they would just scan your bag and not body search you. But you still get checked. The pilots as well. So I would say it's very, very difficult, close to impossible for something like that to happen. And I mean, if there's something, once I had a little mirror in my handbag and they checked it and they said, oh, there's a knife, because the way the mirror was laying, it looked like a knife. So they literally removed everything from my bag. So I would say no, I don't think it's possible.
Is that the knife you used to steal the ring on the other
what they have done previously, and I think that's the only way you can do it, is they've previously used weapons on board and hide it in the plane, like hide it in the baby bassinet or whatever. And then, but I also don't know how that would happen because there's so many different planes. But then they would tell their friend, okay, the knife is in the baby bassinet. But like I said, how would they even know that it's on the same aircraft? So I would say it's quite impossible.
That is a relief to know. But I mean, in terms of the story, because we're not flight crew and don't really know what's going on, you kind of do think, I don't think that's very likely, but that doesn't make you tap out of the story and go, I don't believe any of this. I think our fear of flying is just so ingrained that anything feels likely. So just in a more general sense, Janke, did you find it believable? Would you say, as far as you've read for the moment, is it believable? Is everything believable? On a sliding scale, how believable?
It is believable because there's other ways. Like, okay, so for him it was definitely through the pilot's bag, and he didn't go through security, whatever. So that part is a bit, but I made myself believe there's another way they could have done it. Maybe the engineer on the flight or whatever. I mean, maybe there is a way. So I got past that. The other thing that's technically not accurate, but still it's not impossible, but it would have made this story a bit more, or how can I say, the terrorist attack more difficult, is, and I'm not giving anything away by saying this, but the pilot can never be alone in the cockpit. And in this story, he is alone in the cockpit, and the first officer as well. But that never happens in real life. So that's a little bit of assurance for you as well, that a flight attendant has to go in with the first officer or the pilot. So someone else will know what's going on in the aircraft, which is kind of reassuring.
And this thing that she describes, blocking, like where one flight attendant sort of has to block the door if a pilot is coming in or out. According to TJ Newman, it was while she was blocking that she kind of had this idea, but just quickly explain blocking and what is it? Why does it happen?
So that means when the first officer or the pilot has to come out of the aircraft, out of the cockpit, or a flight attendant has to go in, because a flight attendant, fun fact, has to check on the cockpit, the flight, well, let's call it cockpit, every 30 minutes to see if they are both still breathing and fine and everything. So when that happens, someone has to block the cockpit door and actually close the curtains as well, if there are any. So that, because when you open the cockpit door, it's easy to breach. I mean, someone can just run into the cockpit door. So for that reason, someone has to stand there physically blocking the door until the door closes. So
is that a scary thing to do? It kind of feels like you're literally putting your body on the line.
It does, but you're doing it for not only for yourself, but for all the other people on board and for the cockpit. I mean, so it's scary, but also it's a bit, you feel like a superhero. You feel like Wonder Woman.
Yeah, do the pose and everything.
I mean, TJ Newman does eventually, like, one of the things that the effect this book has on you is it does make you think differently about flight crew. And I think many of us think, they're there to hand you your drink and give you the choice between beef or chicken. But really, if something goes wrong, your life is as much in their hands as it is in the pilot's. So, yeah.
I enjoy that part so much because people really do forget about that. I remember my days as a flight attendant. It really frustrated me that people really treat you like a waitress. And then we would joke, we as crew would joke about it. We would be like, okay, so if there's, one live vest, and I'm definitely giving it to the nice customer, not the one that demanded that I give him the chicken when I don't have. So yeah, they do forget about that. So I hope the people who read it does see it that way, like you said, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Eugenie, and then just finally, like a last thing I wanted to ask you is, I read your review of Falling on Instagram, and I think we can talk about this without spoiling the ending. but can you recap just what your thoughts are about the way the story is wrapped up?
Yeah, I'm not going to say a lot because I hate it when people spoil things like movies or books or anything. I just think for me, and this is very subjective because I also saw a lot of reviews that they love the ending. So this is a very personal thing. Maybe I'm just a bit more bloodthirsty than others. I don't know. But I just felt with everything that happened on the plane and on the ground, maybe the ending was just a little bit too clean or too neat for me. But I mean, that's just me.
I think I share your sentiment about that. But again, there is also a part of you, and I think a part of all of us who just, a gratifying ending. Even if it seems too neat for the sort of chaos and violence of the story that came before, it does give you a sort of sense. Again, we were talking about that earlier. Just in this time, it's kind of satisfying to just feel like, cool, this thing definitely ends. So I think I don't think we have any questions, but maybe Jennifer, if you'd like to return to the conversation, and then we can just wrap it up. And hopefully people are inspired to pick it up and pick up a copy of Falling. And
I think the cover is really cool. I would definitely pick that for the cover, if nothing else. But it does sound like a really gripping story. So something to really sink your teeth into. I'd just like to say thank you very much to Jonathan Ball Publishers for helping us put this event together this evening, and to Bibi, Eugenie, and Janke for unpacking the book a bit and giving us some lovely bookish conversation to listen to this evening. It was a real treat. If you haven't got yourself a copy of Falling by TJ Newman yet, it is out now at all good bookshops and online. That's about it for me. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for hosting us.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.